the terrifying, the undying, the coming to your D&D table. We are talking Vecna with the surprise release of the Vecna Dossier. And to talk about that with me, I have Jasmine Bhullar. How are you doing today?
I'm doing amazing. It's always a pleasure to sit and chat with you, Amy. Thank you so much for having me.
I am so excited, and you were the perfect person to ask for this because I have seen your amazing diabolical DMing in action, and I plan to learn some things. But the dossier itself, if you're wondering what is that, it is up right now on dndbeyond.com. You can go use the claim page to grab it at no cost. The stat block for Vecna in your games is available right now. Claim it through June 16th at no cost, and then it'll be available as a subperk for June or July if you want to snag it. And we're so excited about Vecna that we also made some dice if you want to pick those up. The dice of Vecna with a nice creepy eyeball theme. But once you have your dossier, once you have your dice, once you're looking at this gorgeous, complicated, cool stat block, how do you make the most of it at your table? Jasmine, looking at the stat block itself, where would you start as a DM? Giving some advice on this one.
Yeah, the first thing that jumps out at me is that Vecna has an answer for everything, if that makes sense. I feel like he's almost more reactionary to what the players are doing than an all-out assault from the gate, because that's where he kind of strives, as being a strategic mastermind. Right out of the gate, we can see he has 3 reactions per round. All of his reactions are horrible. There's not a single one that I would want to come up against. And he has most of his like magic abilities involve saving throws, but they're not deck saving throws or wisdom saving throws like what we normally see. Most of them are very high constitution saving throws. You know, that thing that a lot of spellcasters don't have a lot of. So I highly recommend using these strengths to kind of compensate for his relatively low armor class, for, you know, the challenge level he is, 18 AC. I have a group of level 7 players that I run through dungeons every week, and they could beat an 18 armor class. But, you know, making the most of like what Vecna is good at, which is striking fear into the minds of his opponents and kind of undoing all of their plans. He's got a really cool spell list. He's got some really cool ways to thwart the player's plans. So I highly recommend going through the kit and seeing what your player's regular habits are and what you can do to undo that, because that's where he really shines, is dispelling magic, getting rid of the bless, getting rid of, you know, the healing effects, getting rid of the AoE effects that are usually very helpful, dispelling that hunger of Hadar, dispelling the Ivard's black tentacles, and kind of shifting the battlefield to always be in his favor. And he can plane shift if all else fails. So he could just shift to
He'll
shift
find
to
a
another
battlefield that is in
plane.
his favor. Absolutely. If you are in a Vecna-y mood from, let's say, a certain Stranger Things, or for any other reason, here is your guide on how we're going to make the most of it.
Where Vecna's strength lies is in being an amazing magic user. So although it might be tempting to kind of throw him at your players, I would actually hazard to say to keep him as far away as you can and aim for the squishy people first. Now, he does have some really cool reactions in his kit to deal with if players run up to him. He's got that vile teleport where if he gets, or sorry, fell rebuke, where he can basically teleport away with a vile teleport if he does get struck. I think that informs you on everything you need to do. I definitely say you can use afterthought to hit, but I would recommend getting out of the fray as quickly as possible and unleashing like a barrage of spells and AoE damage on the players instead, because that's going to hurt them a lot more.
That makes a ton of sense. And of course, he has 5-a-day legendary resistances, so he can shrug off a
Mhm.
lot of what they're going to try on him. And the special quality for those, if you're not familiar with Vecna, you should definitely check out the brief guide to Vecna that went up over on D&D that gives you a rundown. Liches are wonderful creatures of mythology, a huge part of D&D history. The key element being they're very tough to kill, because you haven't really killed them till you found that one special thing, the phylactery, that is the key to their true destruction, and they make that very difficult. So that's reflected here in the undying feature of
Mhm.
how Vecna works. But of course, that's only if you can manage to get him down to no hit points, which could take some
Yes.
doing. What's our next step, Jasmine?
Yeah, because if we look at the spells, a lot of them are what I would call like in Magic the Gathering, we use the term, what is it, evasion. A lot of the spells are to kind of like keep the players at bay. I I don't know if this is too evil. This feels like a B. Dave Walters move. If we look at Vecna's like spell list, he does have dispel magic. And doing things like dispelling the party's bless, dispelling protection from energy, that might seem really evil, but it makes those AoE hits like from the Flight of the Damned and stuff like that just hit so much harder. Making sure that it's hard for people to, or it's like easy for people to fail their saving throws and more difficult for them to hit is always going to be helpful. Um, the reactions are my favorite part of Vecna because he also has Dread Counterspell, which means not only can he can counterspell and deal damage at the same time to the person he's counterspelling. Now, this could be used for anything from, I don't know, a healing word to a revivify. Is that evil? Yes. Is Vecna evil? Yes. I think it should be a reasonable expectation if your party is facing off against Vecna to have that conversation of, you might die. Um, and I think like there's multiple ways for him to also raise the party as dead people. I would kind of once again flavor this where rules as written is cool, but if one of the players is downed and risen as a zombie, why not have your players roll, to see if they're frightened by that, to see if they're, if they have difficulty striking against their former friend. These are all tools you can use. The stat block really is just a starting point, but you can go crazy with this, right? So I totally think if you down one of the party members and raise them as a zombie, maybe you can ask your players to do a roll to see if they can bring themselves to strike their former friend. um yeah, those are my favorite things about the stat block. Actually, my brain was like spinning as I was reading through it because I was like, there's so much opportunity here to like really just like twist that knife.
Well, and it allows for such specific and memorable play. Obviously, as you,
Hmm.
I think, are sort of hinting at throughout this conversation, you always want to make sure things are right for you and your table. But a lot of times, if your players know they're rolling up against Vecna, they are ready for some fear. They are ready for some challenge. And these are, I think, are amazing ideas on how to bring that to life. Would you, as a DM, like, I'm just going off on a tangent now, but like, if you're gonna make it extra challenging, would you also let them use sort of their knowledge of their compatriots to see to how to take the zombie down? Will that be part of the flavor?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Definitely. If they were like, well, I know that this person has an injury on their left leg, so they move. Yeah, no, I definitely think you should always reward player ingenuity. I'm a firm believer that like you should, I don't want to say punish your players, but if you are a naturally punishing DM, you have to be equally as rewarding.
Mm.
I think that that's the balance there. If you have a tendency to make, sort of design encounters that are very difficult to beat, the reward has to match that. And if you have villains like Vecna that are masterminds, that are very skilled, that are very smart, that know how to get one over on the players, then you have to reward the players when they meet him where he's at. It's kind of like a chess game. So if they come up with something really interesting, I definitely say, reward that, that would be amazing. I also
Oh, that's
love
a
that Vecna has 3 reactions because this is something I often do, and I get I've caught flack for it where people are like, "That's what legendary reactions are for." But I like that Vecna has 3 reactions. As someone that does that myself with monsters I homebrew, I just wanna say I appreciate that to whoever made the stat block because that's totally like a bronze move is to is
absolutely.
to give
He
a
he can
boss
take
3 reactions.
up to 3 reactions per round, but only 1 per turn.
Mhm.
Which I'm just gonna guess means like you don't chain them together after the same person's turn. Um,
Yes, yes.
uh,
3 per round, depending on the size of your party, that's gonna nullify a lot, especially that dread
absolutely.
counterspell. Especially that
So
I'm telling you, when you play this boss, go for the casters. They're not gonna know what to do. This is like your barbarian's time to shine, you know?
Barbarian's
I
like,
guess he
can't
has
get
an
in my
answer
head,
for
nothing in
that
here.
too, though.
Haha.
Yeah, he's really good at negating spell attacks too. Or sorry, multi attacks. Because once he takes damage, he can like teleport. So he's a tough one. I wouldn't want to fight him.
So let's talk about some of the attacks. Obviously, the spell casting is going to be a major
Hmm.
feature. He's got some at will, some 2 a days, some 1 a days, but he's got that
Hmm.
major flight of the damned. He conjures a torrent of flying spectral entities that fill a 120-foot cone and pass through all creatures in that area before dissipating. Each creature in that area must make a DC 22 Constitution saving throw. On a failed save, they take 88 necrotic damage, and they're frightened of Vecna for 1 minute. I'm frightened of Vecna all the time, but I would
Hmm.
be officially in game frightened of Vecna. On a failed save, the creature takes half as much, isn't frightened, but still takes it. A frightened creature can repeat it at the end of its turns, etc., etc. This recharges on 5 and 6. So is this your first move? Do you charge in with this first and just blast the area with fear?
Like if I were to play Vecna, the thing about Flight of the Damned is it is a recharge spell. So it
Hmm.
is one of those things that you can't use it every round. So you want to get the maximum number of rolls on it. So it's not something I would keep in your back pocket, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
You want to use it, in my opinion, right out of the gate. So then you have more chances to kind of make that roll, get that 5 or 6, and have it recharge. But that's really if you're trying to kill your party. But that's like that's like a tactical thing for me. If there's like a breath weapon or anything like that, that you have to roll a die to recharge, you should always roll it on the first round of combat. That way you get the maximum number of times to roll to see if it can come back up or come off cooldown, however you want to phrase that. So, like, yes, I would totally do that. Also, frightening the party if I mean, a 22 save is like actually pretty hard to meet unless you have the constitution for that. I've noticed a lot of like saves for being frightened are wisdom saves. But this being a con save makes it like a little bit more unique, in my opinion, because this creates a situation where everyone other than like the sort of tanks of your party are probably going to have a very difficult time making that save. So a lot of times, maybe like your big damage dealers, your
I love
sorcerers,
the
your
idea that, like,
wizards,
yes, the more of a squishy wizard you are, the more vulnerable you are to being frightened of Vecna. And I think that I love that from a flavor perspective as well. Not just
Mhm.
because it's related to body, but sort of in like as a general rule, if you specialized in something other than that, you probably also have a lot of background information that might lead you to very sensibly be frightened for Vecna of Vecna. So that
Mhm.
kind of all dovetails nicely as we get into this combat. Um, from the spellcasting list, which if I'm looking at this and let's say I'm a new DM and I'm like, I want to be so cool and I want to be scary and I want to really challenge my players, that's a lot of spells.
Mhm.
Oh my gosh, is there like a go-to that you would recommend in terms of these lists, or how would you sort of structure them?
Well, a
It's
lot
a
of the
big question.
spells are utilitarian, right? So earlier when I was saying like I would barrage them with spells, I think I was mostly talking about like his abilities, which I think are spells like Rotten Fate and Flight of the Damned.
Mhm.
But I do think like one of the useful ones in my opinion is like fly, because one of the things that is going to come into play, I think, depending on where you fight Vecna, is how do you create a situation where he has the mobility that you want, but he can also distance close and get those 2 attacks with Afterthought? Because if we look at Afterthought, it actually has some pretty horrible effects if it hits. If the target is a creature, it's afflicted by entropic magic, taking 2d8 necrotic damage at the start of each of its turns. Immediately after taking this damage on its turn, the target can make a DC 20 Constitution saving throw, ending the effect on itself on a success. Until it succeeds on the save, the afflicted target can't regain hit points. Sorry, so difficult for me to read. That is absolutely brutal, especially if you pair that up with something like Rotten Fate or Flight of the Damned, which Vecna can strike twice with Afterthought after using one of these abilities or a spell. I would say getting in to like sort of get that damage, especially when you have creatures that are frightened and are running away from you on every turn. Fly, in my opinion, is actually really utile here. Because Vecna's speed is only 30 feet. So if you have players that are going to try to keep that distance on you and try to avoid getting that debuff from Afterthought, Fly is going to be one of the natural options for me, I think. I don't know if that's like the best tactical option, but I also like this idea of just like this scary lich flying around the room, hitting people with this cursed blade. So it also, it's
It helps
got some
keep you out
utility
of the
there.
way. It pairs well with like your general teleport escape strategy, but it also can get you to
Mhm.
them to do that damage. I think that makes a lot of sense. Mm.
A lot of swooping in, swooping out, and it lasts for 10 minutes. So
So
there's a lot to use there.
absolutely. So I was looking at Anime Dead earlier, but actually I think what I wanted to be doing was showing off as you were describing some battlefield plans, what happens in Rotten Fate. Can you tell us a little bit about Rotten Fate, one of the other special attacks?
Rotten Fate is one of my favorites. So Vecna causes necrotic magic, I can't read, to engulf one creature he can see within 120 feet of himself. That's quite a bit. And like I said, if you have fly up, that means you can move to make sure you have that line of sight a little bit. The target must make a DC 22 con save, taking 8d8 plus 60 necrotic damage on a failed save, or half as much damage on a successful one. A humanoid killed by this magic rises as a zombie at the start of Vecna's next turn and acts immediately after Vecna in the initiative order. The zombie is under Vecna's control. So this kind of does go hand in hand with a spell like Animate Dead. You can overwhelm your adventurers with numbers. I do think, however, there's like a psychological component because your party will still be reeling from the fact that one of their members is downed, and then having to deal with them as a threat, and then at the very next turn is like a really cool thing to do, in my opinion. I think it's fun.
So you can both use the daggers to keep them from healing, use a counterspell to prevent the of any effect that might like help them make that save. And once they're actually down, or if you hit them with a rotten fate, then turn them to your service. So it's really just a terrifying, delicious combo of evil.
And like I said, that dispel magic, if there's like any healing spirits they summon, you can dispel them. If there's if they have like, I'm forgetting what spell it is, but I believe there's like a companion healing spirit spell. You could dispel a lot of that, or murder the healing spirit. Vecna would do that. I truly think he would. But the idea that he also has like invisibility, like he could, this is what I mean, like when I say like turn it into a psychological fight, like giving him invisibility or flight and having him pop up behind another player, flavor that. Have him go invisible and then have him pop up behind the person you least expect and go for that person, go for the weakest person in the party, because that's what Vecna would do. It's like the heart of darkness.
I love it. It's delicious and it's evil. So as we are talking about applying Vecna, do you have any general advice on like if we don't feel like masterminds, how do we
Mhm.
try to present ourselves running the Archlich at full power? Do you have any like broad mastermind advice?
Yeah, I'm not a huge mastermind myself in the sense that I am much better at solving puzzles than I am at making puzzles, if that makes sense. Um, and when it comes to a character like Vecna, I think you have two options here. You can either run the encounter the sort of min-max way, which is taking the optimal course of action every single turn, which is a completely valid way to play, or you can go with column B, which is trying to do things for the maximum like emotional effect, or to troll your players, for lack of a better word. And I think like that is where the sort of mastermind sort of like the mastermind kind of vibes come in, because I feel like it is a vibe, right? It can be difficult to play a character that's one step ahead of the players if you don't feel like you're one step ahead of the players. But I think what makes a character like Vecna so interesting, or what makes him come off as a mastermind, is that he's always in his prey's head. And so even if you're not the biggest tactical strategist, that is something you can use. A simple tool is just listening to your players, listening to what matters to them. If there's a character that's always checking for traps, throw in some traps. If there's a character that's terrified of mimics because he fought a mimic once, have like that psychic damage be flavored as mimics. Sometimes being a really good listener naturally makes your players feel like you are one step ahead of them, even if you didn't have it planned all along, because your players will usually tell you what they're most afraid of and what they don't want to happen. Um, and I think there's a way to incorporate that into the game without being metagamey. I think if
Mhm.
there's something that you see that like, oh, your players are always they always do this, that's something Vecna would know. I think this is the one case where you don't have to worry about metagaming. If your players have this strategy where they always have the druid cast Wall of Fire and then they have the warlock do this, this is your chance to be like, Vecna's in their heads. Vecna would know that. I know that because I pay attention when my players play the game. So therefore, I'm going to dispel that spell or I'm going to counterspell it and then I'm going to do this and this and this and this and completely throw a wrench in their plans because he's Vecna.
Well, and especially if he has if it's part of your story that he might know they're coming, like canonically in the stat block, he's got scrying. He may literally have sent them some test fights, set up some stuff to put them through on their way towards confronting him and be like, saw what you did there,
Mhm.
and I'm ready. You know, you don't want your players to feel targeted in the wrong way, but the
Yeah.
idea that this terrifying guy has set a trap for you specifically, what a cool moment.
Yes, I think it can be really special. And I think, like I said, there's ways to warn the party too. Like if you see someone's getting low on health and you know someone's like, oh, well, I just always wait until they're X amount of low and then I lay on hands, taking, like I said, taking advantage of that. Maybe then you say, oh, like maybe that's the character I should hit with afterthought. So they think that they're going to get to a certain threshold and then get healed, but now their hit points can't go up. And now we've set them up to be knocked out. And then from here, what else can happen? But setting those expectations, like you said, throughout the environment that you're going to be fighting him, I think with this stat block, I think that's fair. I think setting up your party's expectations as they go into it of what they might be dealing with so that they can have a chance with maybe some necrotic resist or maybe some immune to, the being frightened condition, just little things like that. I would pepper the layer or the environment you're fighting him in with little challenges that are similar to some of these abilities he has, like Flight of the Dam, so that they can be ready. Even whether they're traps, whether it's like a chest they open and these spectral winged beings fly out and everyone has to make a con save. I think it'll start to adjust their expectations for what to expect so it doesn't feel unfair.
My last for me question is just a general being scary. Bringing voices, bringing if we don't feel like we have a naturally intimidating presence, but we want to rock Vecna at the table and be really memorable. Any sort of
Mhm.
small tips you might have on that one?
Yeah, I mean, not everyone's like a professional voice actor, and I think like it can be difficult to embody that if maybe that's not your natural like performance strength. But I think this is like where D&D is magical and you can use narrative to really kind of drive that home. If you don't feel like you can do Vecna's voice justice, I mean, you can have, like I said, a lot of that terror manifest as visions. You can have it manifest as things like that. You can kind of go in that sort of vein where he makes you see things. Maybe not even from your past, but like kind of makes you feel like you can't tell what's real and what's fake anymore. And the most terrifying thing about Vecna, in my opinion, is that first of all, he wrote the Book of Vile Darkness, and my first ever character is from the Book of Vile Darkness. So I'm personally very attached to Vecna.
Be worried about
Yeah.
Jasmine. I'm okay.
I know, right? Yeah, 3.5 was the first edition of D&D I ever played. Um, but it's that he he has such a tragic backstory and he is so intelligent and naturally talented. And there is a way to play that small. This is the one place where maybe you don't have to be like, whoa, ha, 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 but you can play it sort of small with a little bit of a more subtlety or nuance to it. And that can come across a lot with your body language and how you look at your players. Maybe your eyes linger on each of them a little bit longer than it usually does when he's talking to them. Maybe it's the way you sit. Are you hunched over at the table? Like embodying that physically and making your players feel unsettled while they're at the table. That can do a lot, even if you don't feel like you have a really good Vecna voice or you have a hard time maybe like it, kind of projecting. These are places where it might be okay to whisper or to be kind of like this slinky, dangerous creature, because it's really whatever spin you put on it, and identify what you don't feel confident about and then counteract it. That's usually my strat. So if I'm not, good with an accent, I will find another way to like make a character interesting or compelling or give them an affectation, because I know that like my accent, I don't have that many that I can do super well. So I find other ways to make NPCs stand out from each other. And that's my advice for like making a villain evil. If you know that the disconnect is your voice or you're soft spoken, or there's ways to make that menacing, find your strength and lean into it instead of focusing on like your weakness, and it'll make you a great Vecna. I'm sure your players will love it.
I love that. Okay, this now I feel inspired to ascend to demigodhood through evil and the power of Vecna, which I think is Vecna's whole deal.
Apotheosis time.
Thank you so much. This is amazing advice. Is there anything that we haven't covered? Obviously, we could talk forever about the things in this stat block, but that you would want to make sure people are bringing to the table when they use the Vecna Dossier to bring Vecna into their games.
I think, like, in addition to the stat block, if you're not familiar with Vecna, I would definitely read the lore on the page as well, because I do think that's going to inform you on how evil you should be when playing this character. And I think, like, just have fun with it, There's a lot of fun stuff in his kit, but like I said, it can feel unfair. So make sure that you establish expectations going in. Because if you have players that are like, I don't know who Vecna is, this will be just like any other boss we fought, they're going to be in for a really bad time. I think it's good to just sort of manage those expectations of this is going to be one of the hardest fights probably you've ever done, because Vecna has an answer for everything. And think about that when you're playing him. He has an answer for characters that get into the fray and hit, 2 or 3. The monk with flurry of blows. He has answers for everything. Don't be afraid to use those answers. And if you read carefully in his kit, like, it's very difficult to put damage on him, and it's very easy for him to put damage on other people. So focus down the party one by one and take them out. Line them up and knock them down.
I love it. I feel inspired to terrify my characters with the power of Vecna, using the Vecna Dossier. Thank you so much for joining us for this. You can claim the Vecna Dossier right now at no cost on D&D Beyond. Use that claim page from now until Thursday, June 16th. After that, the dossier is going to be available as a subperk for June and July. And you can bring Vecna to your table. And just, I would love personally to hear in the comments or on tweets or wherever you want to share it with us, your cool stories of how you're bringing Vecna to unlife, I guess, in your games, because we do have this beautiful archvillain steeped in D&D myth, steeped in fantasy, the good kind of tropes, archetypes. That's what I'm looking for. And now known to more people than ever through the magic of a little show. Folks might be following along where Vecna is showing his terrifying head. So if you've been enjoying Stranger Things, if you want to snag that dossier, please go ahead and do that. Jasmine, where can people find you?
Hi, you can find me at That Bronze Girl everywhere on Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, and yes, hit me up if you decide to make your Vecna fly and be invisible, because it might not be the most tactical move, but it's the most interesting one.
Where is he? Literally don't know. Fun things to ponder. Is he behind you right now? Stop watching the video and check. Thank you. Enjoy the dossier, and we will see you next time on D&D Beyond.